Alright, so our next section is 3.4. 3.4, we're going to be focusing on slope-intercept form. And you might be saying, well, what's slope-intercept form? We already talked about how equations, linear equations has an x value and a y value. And we had ordered pairs. So some of our equations that we were working with might have looked like this. 3x plus 2y equals negative 4. Okay. So we had x and we had y and we had ordered pairs and we talked about how to graph these things. But if I give you an equation and I don't give you any ordered pairs and I asked you, tell me what the slope of this is. And we talked about how to find slope, but you would have to have two ordered pairs. Now you might then say, well, I can do x and y intercepts and maybe then I have my 2 points. But I will show you a much quicker and faster way of doing it than to first try to find 2 points that would work to make this statement, then remember the formula, the change in y over the change in x, and then reduce the slope. What we're going to do is we're going to convert this into something called slope-intercept form. Now you might have heard it better, y equals mx plus b. When y is by itself, it must be by itself. And what I mean by itself, there's no coefficient, it's not added or subtracted to anything, it's just y. Then what we would tell you is that the variable x, whatever the coefficient of x is, that is the slope. But this only works when y is by itself. So I don't want you to say, well, I know the coefficient of x right now is 3, so the slope is 3. You have to have y by itself. When y is by itself, this is known as the slope-intercept form. That this letter m is the slope, which is really the coefficient of x. And then the b, this is known as the y-intercept. It is the constant in your equation, but only when y is by itself. Trying to squeeze it in there. You'll see it, y-intercept. And then you know a y-intercept is a point. Okay, so don't say b equals. When we have a y-intercept, you're supposed to do parentheses. Remember, a y-intercept has y as a number and x as 0. So a lot of times, because this is the letter b, they'll put b there, okay, instead of a y, because the y is all the way over here. So if you had an equation that looked like this, y equals negative 5x plus 7. Because y is by itself, I don't have to find 2 points to try to figure out the slope. I can easily say, ooh, y is by itself. That's good. This is known as then slope-intercept form. When it's in slope-intercept form, then you can just grab the coefficient of x. Right there. That's your slope. M equals negative 5. And this, your constant, would be known as your intercept. But we would write it as 0, comma, whatever this number is. See how quick that was to find slope? We didn't have to have 2 points. We didn't have to do y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. Reduce, get rid of those parentheses and stuff. We just easily grab the coefficient of x. Now the problem is, not every equation is going to have y by itself. Let's go back to this guy. Y is not by itself. So let's talk about the steps so that we can easily just say, oh, the coefficient of x, that's my slope. So I wrote out the steps over here. So to find the slope given an equation where we don't have to worry about finding points, the first thing that we have to do is solve the equation. We need to get y by itself. Now we did this, solving for a specified variable. This is why we spent so much time in the first unit with all those funky formulas. And I said I wanted to get just one letter by itself. This is one reason why we kept on talking about if there's more than one letter, we might have to rearrange to get one letter on one side and the rest of the stuff on the other. So remember those steps? We had simplifying, but these problems won't have parentheses, so I skipped that part. So what you're going to do is underline the y variable. We want to get y by itself, not x. Always y by itself. We're going to move any term that is added or subtracted to that y term. And you know how to move. We do the additive inverse. Additive inverse just meant opposite signs. Just remember that the moving step is a balancing step. So if I do a -2 on the left, you must do a -2 on the right. Once you move that constant over, then what you want to do is divide both sides by the coefficient. Okay, so whatever the coefficient of y is, divide both sides by that coefficient and its sign. With that, you're going to get your equation y equals mx plus b. Of course, m and b are going to be numbers in your case. They're not going to be the letter m and b. Once you do that, then we can say, as simple as whatever the coefficient of x is, this m part, whatever number is there, that's your slope. And then whatever your constant is, the b part, just put it as your y-intercept as 0, comma, whatever the b is, okay? Whatever number that is. So let's erase and let's focus on the original equation that we gave you. So the first step we told you was underline the y. Okay? Remember, there's a left-hand side and a right-hand side because it's an equation. So let's underline the y. Then we're going to see if anything's added or subtracted to the y. See how the 3x is added to this y term? So we're going to have to move. Remember how to move? Additive inverse. So the opposite of what 3x is. Not the opposite of this sign. Opposite of what 3x is. So if this was a -3x, the opposite would have been a positive. This one is clearly a positive 3x, so then we're going to have to do a -3x. Remember how I said that it's a balancing step? So if I have to do a -3x on the left, we're going to do a -3x on the right. These cancel out because they're inverses, so I'm left with positive 2y. Okay, you can bring down the plus if you want. It's not necessary. If it's a minus sign, you definitely have to bring that down. Now be careful here. One's a constant, one's a variable. One has an x, one's a plain number. Remember, variables and constants you cannot collect. So this is where I kept on saying you might want to put the x term first and the constant term last, because it fits the pattern of y equals mx plus b to have the constant term written last. So I'm going to write this one first, and then write this there. Now notice I'm getting a little closer to that y equals mx plus b. The problem is I got to get rid of this, the 2, the coefficient. Remember our last step, the divorcing. Separate the coefficient from the y variable by dividing by the coefficient and its sign. So I'm going to divide this side by 2. Now notice that there's 2 items here. You don't divide only one, you have to divide both of them. So I'm going to divide this by 2 and this by 2. When you do that, this cancels out and you get your y. This is how we can get slope to be a fraction. Remember, sometimes we had slope as just a whole number, but other times we had slope as a fraction. So you look to see if you can reduce this. 3 over 2, no, you can't reduce. So what I'm going to do is just say 3 over 2. This x, since it's on top, I can slide it over. Anything that's on top, you can technically slide it over. The reason why is just remember, you can put this over 1. So top was top, that's how I get 3x. 2 times 1 is 2. So anything on top, you can just slide it over away from the parentheses. And then here, negative 4 divided by a positive 2 is going to be a negative 2. Now you can see y is by itself. Once y is by itself, I know 2 things from this. The coefficient of x, that's my slope. So just say m, because we said m is shorthand for slope. Make sure you include the sign, because remember, slopes can be positive or negative. So negative 3 halves. And then the questions on Alex, they're going to ask you for the y-intercept as well. And you know the y-intercept is the constant. The constant is a negative 2. Now make sure you write it as a y-intercept. So you need to have, for a y-intercept, parentheses. X will always be 0 for y-intercepts. And whatever your constant is, put it here, where the y would be. So there's your slope. There's your y-intercept. We didn't have to plot or work with any intercepts or points. All we had to do was just get y by itself. And remember, it's easy as underlining, moving anything that's added or subtracted by doing the additive inverse, and then dividing by the coefficient of y. That way you have slope at hand and y-intercept.